Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto this week, will the Republican-led Congress follow President Trump's executive order to reschedule cannabis? Well, that's the biggest question 3 weeks after the lasting image of 2025, when Trump's executive order recognized the medical use of cannabis 50 years after Richard Nixon placed it alongside heroin and LSD.
You know, I was glued to my television, watching it all unfold. And it was a big nothing burger, is the way I would look at it.
That's Jamie Pearson, one of the most respected consultants in the cannabis industry, who shared her thoughts about the state of the industry in 2026. And Congress has moved away from a prohibition initiative amendment in a spending bill. Andrew Berenger has more on that story from Washington, D.C. Plus, another state joining the $1 billion club is Ohio, who, while celebrating that milestone, has their governor, Mike DeWine, signing SB 56, recriminalizing some aspects of their new legalization laws. And don't mess with Mike Tyson and Ric Flair, two celebrity endorsers of cannabis products, now suing the company that signed them for $50 million. Flair and Tyson accused Karma of fraud and money laundering. Plus, a breaking news story out of California, as Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead has passed away at the age of 78. Just another week in the fight to end cannabis prohibition on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Cannabis Coast to Coast news show of the new year. I'm Elena Pinto. Every week, WPCM TV shares news of the fight to end cannabis prohibition here in America and around the world. We start 2026 with some breaking news over the weekend. One of the original members of the Grateful Dead rock band, Bob Weir, has died at the age of 78. Together with his longtime friend, the late Jerry Garcia, the Dead emerged from the counterculture of the San Francisco sound of the 1960s and were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1994. Weir and Garcia were lifelong friends and went on for decades, making great music and providing unforgettable concerts. The group of dedicated fans are called Deadheads, who celebrated the plant medicine like so many from California, where the decriminalization movement started in the 1990s with Prop 215 and the passing of Compassionate Care Act. So Bob Weir now joins Jerry Garcia in heaven, and now they can celebrate. One more Saturday night going down the road feeling bad and playing in the band while trucking around in another life. Executive producer Jimmy Young will be mourning the loss for sure. It was 3 weeks ago, 7 days before Christmas, when President Donald Trump signed his executive order asking his federal agencies like the DOJ and the DEA to move forward with rescheduling cannabis as fast as possible. The industry is cautiously optimistic that just identifying cannabis with medicinal benefits is a win, and the first time the government admits they made a mistake in 1970 when they placed it next to heroin and LSD. Move cannabis off its most restrictive classification in the Controlled Substances Act from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Trump's order didn't change anything. It just starts the process of asking Trump's Republican-controlled government to move it to Schedule 3 as expeditiously as possible. This past week, executive producer Jimmy Young talked to one of the most respected and influential consultants in the industry, Jamie Pearson from the New Holland Group.
We had a president, a sitting president, do something positive to identify that cannabis has medicinal qualities, and he wants to take it off the Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. And Jamie, I don't think you're old enough to remember Richard Nixon, but I am. The fact that that guy, the president in 1970, continues to haunt me. He haunted me as a 12-year-old. I didn't want my brother to get drafted, you know? Anyway, that was a big deal. How did you react to it? How have you spun this? Because there's still a lot of people out there that I walk up to and they say, "Oh, I heard that, the president rescheduled cannabis." And I'm like, no, he didn't. He wants to. I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misunderstanding about what that meant. To answer your question, I heard many, many rumors for months before it happened that it was coming from various people that have inside the White House sources and things like that. And you hear so much of that, you take all of it with a grain of salt and say, well, we'll see what happens when it happens. And, I was glued to my television watching it all unfold. And it was a big nothing burger, is the way I would look at it. It was much ado. Let me say this. There were some administrative and structural things that took place with that will set some things in motion.
Mhm.
But when those things that are now set in motion happen, that's when we'll actually see some change. Right now, there's nothing other than he signed a document telling the three-letter agencies that he wants them to change some things, but nothing really changed at a structural level.
Right.
So,
Yep.
I just think people need to understand it was not the legalization of cannabis the way a lot of people misunderstand it to be. It just
Right.
wasn't.
Exactly right.
Mhm.
And it's funny you mentioned those three-letter groups that
Agencies.
the
Uh-huh.
agencies, the DEA, the FDA.
Yeah.
The FDA had a charge after that farm bill in 2016 to get involved and create regulations, and they did nothing for 7 years. That to me, it's not criminal, but it's an ugly thing to do. It really is. It's a slap in the face to any, including him, who was behind the scenes telling Mitch McConnell to get this farm bill going. Let's get this hemp out there. Now what?
Well, I think it's further evidence that presidents have power, but a lot of the administrative, financial, and structural inner workings of how our government, our laws, and things function
Yeah.
does require a lot of weigh-in from other places. He signed an executive order. Could he have single-handedly in that executive order said cannabis is now legal, have at it? I think he could. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. What I want to say is we are where we are right now, and good operators are going to look at the letter of the law, which is what cannabis does. And the one thing I'll say is, not to jump ahead on any one topic, but it ties into the hemp versus cannabis conversation, because I do believe he used all of his words very carefully.
Yep.
And he talked a lot about hemp derived CBD, wanting to make CBD, eligible for government, subsidy, things of that nature. So it gave us a little bit of a glimpse of what they're thinking, but how it all shakes out is still unknown. But I do think what good operators will do is continue to look for the ways to continue operating, because I think what nobody wants, Congress, the president, or otherwise, is for people who are feeding their families with the businesses that they created to suddenly just have to lose everything and go out of business.
Right.
I think what everybody was sort of wanting is some common sense approach to regulation.
That entire interview will be released later this week on WPCM TV YouTube channel and is available on demand right now on the WPCMTV.com website. Next up, let's check in with Andrew Behringer in Washington, D.C., where there has been some softening of the prohibitionist rhetoric. In fact, there are signs that Congress might still be able to enact some reforms, or at least try to. Here's Andrew.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The House of Representatives advanced a major spending package for fiscal year 2026, covering a lot from commerce, justice, science, interior environment, and energy, by a wide vote of 397 to 28, sending the bill to the Senate. Now, on cannabis policy, a key protection was preserved. Now, since 2014, Congress has barred the Justice Department from using federal funds to interfere with state cannabis programs, and that safeguard remains intact for now. Lawmakers also kept protections for state hemp research under the 2014 Farm Bill. Now, what's a controversial House committee provision known as Section 607 that could have stopped the DOJ from using funds to reschedule or deschedule cannabis, which is a hot topic right now. Now, one curiosity, the Medical Cannabis Protection Rider lists every covered jurisdiction, but for some reason omits Nebraska. Now, all this comes as fast-moving national debates focused around Donald Trump recently ordering Attorney General Bondi to expedite the cannabis from Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. Now, the DEA says that the rescheduling appeal process remains pending despite the order. The president has asked Congress to revisit that policy and preserve access to full-spectrum CBD, and a federal agency plans to cover certain products for some patients under Medicare and Medicaid. Now, what's next? The Senate takes up this package. Watch out for possible changes in this cannabis policy, clarification of what's going on in Nebraska, and let's see what the DEA does moving forward. Now, while that's the Washington, D.C. report, I'm Andrew Berenger, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Another major development out of our nation's capital is the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has set a date of March 2nd to hear arguments on one of the most challenging rules banning the ownership of guns from cannabis users, and that includes legal medicinal patients. The gun lobby is one of the most powerful in Washington, D.C., and they are using their influence to allow cannabis users the right to bear arms, guaranteed in the Second Amendment. Speaking of the power of lobbyists, our hemp reporter Carrie Hinkle will be in the nation's capital next week while his industry is on the clock for survival. You might remember that the longest government shutdown in history happened last fall and was finally reopened when a bipartisan agreement was reached that bans most hemp products. Now that industry is facing a federal ban that will go into effect in November this year if regulations are not set up for its survival. Hemp lobbyists like our own Carrie Hinkle will be operating in Washington, D.C. this week, and he will have an update from the nation's capital for us next week. Here's Carrie's update on that ongoing fight for survival in the hemp industry.
I'm Carrie Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. After a few weeks off during the holiday break, things are starting to heat back up in our nation's capital as it relates to hemp and cannabis policy. We're still feeling the shakeout from President Trump's executive order on Schedule 3, and something that was sort of tucked away in there is a directive for several agencies in his administration to work with Congress and address the newly passed definition of hemp, which would ban full-spectrum CBD products. Now, of course, President Trump in both Schedule 3 and the hemp news is just a directive. This is, telling Congress and his agencies to get something done, and it's now under them to do that. And so it has been a very helpful messaging piece for us as we meet with Republican offices to let them know President Trump wants this hemp ban addressed. And so part of how we will accomplish that is actually next week, January 12th to 14th. Myself, along with hundreds of other hemp advocates representing half a dozen trade associations, will be meeting with probably well over 100 congressional offices to discuss the hemp ban and to find a way and a legislative solution around that. We'll primarily be pushing for two things, and one is an extension on the ban date, which is now set to take effect on November 13th of this year. Now, is the extension going to be 12, 18, or 24 months? Who would introduce it? Or is it a letter that we ask support for? Are we, what kind of vehicles could this be attached to? These are all things that are being worked out behind the scenes, but it's clear that everyone in the industry understands that we need to have an extension on the ban so that, one, we can provide regulatory and just common sense time relief for our farmers to continue to plan their crop rotations while we work on a legislative and regulatory solution rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We would like to see a federal regulatory bill passed. And that will be the second prong of our advocacy day. And that will be primarily advocating for what we hope to soon be unveiled. Congressman Morgan Griffith from Virginia has been a long advocate of CBD. He's introduced regulatory bills for several different Congresses in a row now, and we anticipate him to release another one in the coming weeks that would address some of the legitimate concerns by Senator McConnell and others in Congress and their intent in passing the ban bill in the first place. we're going to need, packaging standards and labeling requirements. We need a cap on milligram and selling only to adults. These are all things that we're very hopeful to see in Congressman Morgan Griffith's proposal. So while we advocate for an extension before the ban kicks in, we need to let Congress know that we also are not in favor of the status quo and instead would point to something like Congressman Morgan Griffith's bill. So I will be in D.C. next week, and we'll be sure to record a video with the Capitol building behind me as I have in the past, and we'll hopefully be able to report on the latest in D.C. Come next week. So for Bayou City Hemp and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Kerry Hinkle. We'll see you again next week.
Looking back at this history of the cannabis advocacy movement, it all started when then President Richard Nixon created the Controlled Substances Act in 1970 and placed cannabis alongside heroin and LSD as drugs that were highly addictive and had no medical value as a Schedule I drug. Despite President Trump's executive order, cannabis remains in that classification and now gets thrown back into the political game, waiting for the DOJ or the DEA to move the plant medicine to Schedule III. This country operates through the efforts of special interest groups in many huge industries like firearms, big pharma drugs, and big alcohol. The cannabis industry continues to find its way in this republic where money seems to dictate policy. Money is channeled into political action committees who create media messaging to promote their agenda and policies. However, in cannabis, there are three different approaches for operators in the legal cannabis arena: the hemp industry and the still illegal legacy market. So the little cannabis lobby is competing with more organized, more well-funded, and established groups like the gun lobby, alcohol lobby, and big pharma. It might take decades before the cannabis industry is accepted, normalized, and legalized. And this is what the people who support the plant have to face in Washington, D.C. The prohibitionists are galvanized with financial supporters like SAM, the Smart Approaches to Marijuana group, that is fueling the ballot initiatives in existing adult use states. Many want the plant to stay in Schedule I, and they still can't even do traditional banking. The U.S. fights for democracy, but it is a republic, and lobbyists and special interest groups continue to dictate policy. Big pharma, big alcohol, and the big gun lobby are all operating in a solidified and established front, while cannabis and hemp are badly outnumbered. Jamie Pearson understands that the fractionalization of hemp, THC legal cannabis market, and the legacy market really hurts federal reform efforts.
Going back to your lobbying question, until the organizations that have the money at the hemp and cannabis level and the lobbying level actually come together, and there's been different varied initiatives to do that, and get a plan and put the dollars behind a single plan, because I'll tell you something, you don't have different factions in alcohol coming at Congress from different angles. No, do this, no, do that. Yeah, beer and wine and spirits are different, and they may have differentiating goals and agendas, but you better believe the alcohol industry is lobbying as an industry. We're not doing that. We're lobbying as a hemp industry. We got several different fractured factions. Mm-hmm. And until we get together and unite, mm-hmm. and I think that's just a process. I think it'll evolve, and the lobbying dollars have dried up, and the ones that are going to places are going to places that are effective. Mm-hmm. So the effective actors will emerge. The dollars will head in their direction. And until everybody's kind of fighting the good fight on the same page, and we have constant fractured efforts, it's going to be people like Kim that can just push their own agenda through because she funds it herself.
Right.
Those are the people that are going to be speaking for us.
Right. And we talked about the One Plant Alliance that Andrew and Steve D'Angelo are trying. They recognize exactly what you're saying and want to, again, try to bring everyone together under one umbrella, one set of regulations, one set of lobbying dollars. I mean, it does make sense.
Again, if you want to hear that interview in its entirety, it is available on demand on the WPCMTV.com website, or you can wait until we publish it later this week on Thursday and Friday in 2 parts. Now we start our state reports in Michigan, which is reeling from 2 new challenges: the 24% tax increase that went into effect on January 1st, and changes to their neighbor state of Ohio that just recriminalized the possession of out-of-state cannabis products. Here's Amy Carter with more from Michigan.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We start with taxes, and the ripple effects are already being felt. A judge has officially approved a legal challenge to Michigan's new 24% wholesale cannabis tax, keeping industry arguments alive that the tax violates the spirit of the voter-approved cannabis laws. While the lawsuit moves forward, the tax will stay in place with a key hearing scheduled for January 13th. Ahead of the tax taking effect on January 1st, Michigan's dispensaries saw a noticeable spike in customers. Some shoppers rushed in, worried prices would jump immediately under the new tax, prompting what many retailers described as a wave of panic buying before the new year. Industry leaders say the pressure is already showing. C3 Industries is reportedly shutting down its Weberville grow operation, laying off more than 60 workers. Higher Love is also cutting around 60 jobs in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Company officials point to the new wholesale tax cutting into margins in an already competitive market. The tax debate is also entering the political arena. Serenity Hope Salick, a Democratic candidate for the state Senate, recently voiced support for the wholesale tax, while also saying she believes Michigan should eventually cap cannabis taxes moving forward. In other news, Wayne State University is recruiting Michigan veterans with PTSD for a new state-funded clinical trial studying whether cannabis can help improve symptoms. The study is called the Warrior Care Program, and applications are now available online. Detroit Metro Times is also kicking off the new year with a fresh guide highlighting some of the best cannabis flower and live rosin currently available at Michigan dispensaries. And finally, a member of the crew responsible for multiple Michigan dispensary thefts is reportedly heading to prison after investigators connected stolen cannabis to a very clear paper trail. That is it for this week. I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
So arbitrary increases in taxes in different legal states is one issue that this industry continues to fight, from California to Maine to Michigan and Ohio. And now there is another challenge that prohibitionists from coast to coast are using to undo and threaten existing legal adult use markets. In Massachusetts, signatures were collected over the past few months for a ballot question that would shut down the adult use market that has been so successful in the Bay State. These same ballot initiatives are starting in other adult use states, including Maine and now Arizona. Needless to say, advocates and businesses in those states are concerned, especially in Massachusetts, where professional signature gatherers have used nefarious tactics to misrepresent the actual question. Those signatures are now being challenged in court, and Curtis Emery has that story in his Bay State Cannabis Report this week.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It's a new year here in Massachusetts, and the biggest story of 2026 so far is one to celebrate. Yes, the state has announced that on January 13th, it will have a formal hearing in which the committee which gathered signatures to repeal adult use sales here in the state will have its time in court for allegedly collecting signatures fraudulently. Now, this suit alleges that the committee, which was seeking to repeal adult use sales, used fraudulent techniques across the state to gather the signatures that they needed to make that petition turn into a ballot initiative. This suit alleges that the committee which gathered these signatures was misleading the public by either not allowing the signees to see the full description of the proposed law or straight up lied to the public about which this proposed law would do. The suit alleges that many of the signatures collected, which got it to be a ballot initiative, were collected erroneously and should be stricken from the record. The chairperson behind the committee, which is trying to repeal adult use sales here in the state, claimed that all signatures were gathered with integrity. However, let's see what the courts decide. Also in the news here in Massachusetts, the state celebrates $1.65 billion in adult use sales last year, 3 million more than it did in 2024, thanks to 46.3 million transactions here in the state. Great to see where cannabis is going to be going this year. Looking forward to the ride. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report. Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block. But up next, why are two athletic icons, boxer Mike Tyson and wrestling's Ric Flair, suing the cannabis companies that they represented for the past few years? We have that story next, but right now we'll pay tribute to one of the greatest rockers of all time, Bob Weir, and one of the original members of the Grateful Dead who were instrumental in creating and celebrating cannabis culture. Bob Weir passed away on Saturday at the age of 78 from cancer and lung issues. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to the B Block, or second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. On the international scene, the Czech Republic introduced their new adult use laws on New Year's Day. And now citizens will be able to cultivate 3 plants and possess up to 1,000 grams of dried flower at home. Public consumption is still banned, and that country has a viable medical market since 2013. Thailand continues to make changes to their cannabis laws, where citizens were allowed to grow at home years ago, but now a new regime is reconsidering changing their laws to be restricted to medical use only. Now let's check in with Dave Barton in the UK for the first time this year, followed by Debbie Facey in Canada.
Hello, happy 2026. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. More than 7 years after legalization, UK police have finally got official guidance on medical cannabis. Medicinal cannabis and the police guidance for officers and staff has been approved by the National Police Chiefs Council in England and Wales and advises officers to adopt a patients first until otherwise proven guilty approach when dealing with encounters involving CBPMs. While this guidance isn't seen as a complete solution to unnecessary patient arrests and other medical cannabis incidents of discrimination, it helps highlight what's legal to unenlightened officers and should prevent patients from having their medication confiscated and experiencing other issues such as job losses and issues with landlords and local councils. That said, there are still calls for police forces across the UK to undertake specific training on CBPMs. That's all for this week. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. So, over the break, what we've been having in Canada is some new pop-ups when it comes to the regulations and the health and safety concerns, especially when it comes to the batches and to the lots that many of these dispensaries, or I should say LPs, that are distributing. So they are making more of a secrecy when it comes to creating a more flow when it comes to ordering, as well as selling, as well as obtaining the same brand, cannabis, and lot within and from that actual LP or brand. Also, what we have is Health Canada has now decided with the AGCO to de-escalate the amount of security that they had when it came to the cannabis products and the accessories that were allowed to be displayed to customers or displayed in windows, which means that we no longer have any of the awkward, I want to say like tape that would cover the windows or frosted glass. And we no longer have that weird essence going inside a shop and not really necessarily feeling safe because of the fact that we can't see outside. So this is now eliminating most of the robberies, any of the incidences, and any of the foreseeable problems. We do hope that we have now skipped with that decision. And last but not least, we have the projections for the next few years when it comes to Canada. They do see Canada reaching about that $1.5 billion mark around 2030. I'm not too sure if that's going to be it. Let's just see if that happens, just like anything else. But for Canada, this is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. Peace.
There is reason to celebrate in New York State after they surpassed the $2.5 billion mark in sales in 2025. The Empire State has seen the number of dispensaries double from its first year, starting with 261 in 2024 to 556 in 2025. That spurred sales to finish with just over $2.5 billion. And of course, millions in tax revenue. Next up, Kimmie Cannabis in Oklahoma.
I am Kimmie Cannabis with Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. After weeks of frustration, glitches, and patients left confused by the new Med Portal changeover, OMMA announced that effective immediately, Oklahoma dispensaries may accept an official OMMA approval email or approval shown directly in the Med Portal in place of a physical card, as long as it is accompanied by a valid driver's license. This is a change that helps patients, and we embrace that. Next, out of Lawton, an emergency order suspending the operations of Happy Feeling LLC, followed by a routine inspection. More than 4,000 untagged and untraceable marijuana plants and products were identified and immediately placed under administrative embargo. Until further notice, they are prohibited from cultivating, moving, or selling any medical marijuana products. And finally, a story that should have every license holder paying attention. Mike with Mile High Transport has come forward online regarding a recent product confiscation during transport. 24 manifested packages were missing certain compliance labels, such as strain and batch information, an error acknowledged as an honest and correctable mistake by the sender. Despite manifest and metric tags being present, the driver is now facing felony charges, including possession with intent to distribute and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. An arrest warrant has been issued, the driver has been pulled off the road, and he now faces costly legal fight and potential prison time over what many see as a paperwork issue. This case raises serious questions about discretion, overcharging, and whether Oklahoma's medical cannabis operators are being treated fairly under the law. And it's a story we will continue to follow. That's it from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report. I am Kimmie Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
One of the consistent strategies for many brands in the cannabis industry is to sign celebrities and athletes to endorsement contracts. And now two of the biggest names in boxing and wrestling are suing Karma for $50 million for use of their likeness and failing to deliver on contractual promises. Former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson and wrestler Ric Flair are suing Karma, a Chicago-based branding company, of committing 21 counts of fraud and money laundering. The suit accuses 4 former executives and shareholders in Karma of defrauding the celebrity endorsers and using their firm as, quote, their own personal piggy bank, unquote. Now, let's check in with our Southwest correspondent, Tina Tasaka, who tells us about the ballot initiative threat to adult use that prohibitionists are behind in the state of Arizona.
I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis X America, and this is the first Arizona and Nevada report in 2026 for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Welcome to the new year. Who loves Snoop Dogg? On December 27th, Tucson, Arizona proudly hosted the Snoop Dogg Gin and Juice Arizona Bowl, and one Arizona cannabis company was right in the middle of the excitement. Prime Leaf Dispensaries of Tucson brought the big red bus energy to the entire event, creating an unforgettable fan experience. Snoop and his team, including his father, Papa Snoop, rolled through University of Arizona campus aboard the bus during the tailgate festivities, giving smiles, tossing logo gifts to the crowds, and listening to some Snoop tunes. And there's more. Proceeds from the Arizona Bowl support Southern Arizona nonprofits, making the event meaningful and memorable. Congratulations to Prime Leaf Dispensaries. Nearly 6 years after Arizona legalized adult use marijuana, a new 2026 ballot initiative aims to roll back how recreational cannabis operates in the state. Critics warn this measure would dismantle regulation and push consumers back to the black market. The Sensible Marijuana Policy Act for Arizona, recently filed with the Secretary of State, would eliminate recreational dispensaries, cultivation, manufacturing, testing labs, commercial sales, and cannabis tax revenue. Marijuana possession and the ability to grow up to 6 plants would remain legal, but there would be no legal way to buy recreational cannabis. Arizona's medical marijuana program would stay intact. The initiative is orchestrated by Sean Noble, president of American Encore, and heavily funded by the anti-cannabis group Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which is seeking at least $5 million to support the effort. To qualify, the campaign must collect 255,949 signatures by July 2026. Take a listen to Julie Gunnigal, the Arizona Director for NORML, as she comments.
One of the things that we all need to be aware of is what this is going to cost in terms of law enforcement, because repealing prohibition is expensive. We're going to see an increase in arrests, especially of consumers. We are going to see that the money that is currently going to things like community colleges and the Justice Reinvestment Fund, those monies will disappear practically overnight if this initiative passes.
Vencana Ventures reported Q4 interim results with a 26% year-over-year revenue decline to $414,000, but reduced its gross loss to $106,000 after cutting cost of sales by 36%. The company is sharpening its focus on Nevada, where cannabis sales dropped 11% alongside an 8% decline in tourism in the first 9 months of 2025, and has added a dedicated Las Vegas sales rep to strengthen retail relationships. Meanwhile, Vencana is exiting New Jersey, agreeing to sell its 95% stake in Vencana, New Jersey for up to $1.64 million and securing a no-cost release from a guaranteed lease, freeing capital and reducing obligations as it concentrates on Nevada operations and potential federal reform. That's it for the Arizona and Nevada report. I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis X America for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more note from the Bay State of Massachusetts. If you are from out of state, you might want to make a day trip and visit. Right now, the price of flower is at its lowest point in the 8 years of legalization for adults. An eighth of an ounce, or 3.5 grams, is now down to just $14.20. And you can now get 3 1-gram pre-rolls for $10. Of course, there are still plenty of states that don't have an adult use program, but still had to wait 6 years just to get their medical program off the ground. That state is Alabama. Many entrepreneurs had opened federally legal CBD operations when the Farm Bill of 2018 was signed into law during President Trump's first term. Then, after the legal challenges were exhausted, their governor basically shut down all the CBD businesses, including the Cannabama store owned by our Alabama correspondent, Jennifer Boozer-Stewart. She is still trying to figure out what's next for her, but her state is moving forward at a snail's pace. In fact, they just awarded their first legal licenses in their medical program. Jennifer is back this week with an update on what's next in her sweet home of Alabama.
I'm Jennifer Boozer-Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thursday, January 8th, the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission finally issued 3 out of 4 dispensary licenses here in the state. SB 46 was passed in 2021, and patients have been waiting since then for access to medicine. HB 445, which was passed in 2025, wiped out most of the hemp products in the state, and patients have not had any access to the medicine that they need. One of the 4 dispensary licenses is being challenged, so they went ahead and issued the 3 licenses that had passed muster and were not challenged either in court or with the AMCC itself. For a grand total of 9 dispensaries in the entire state of Alabama, we hope that the 4th dispensary license will be issued soon, and that the integrated facility licensing process will get off to a good start over the summer. Patients can now start looking for patient registry information and find out how to get a medical card, and the triggering of the licenses has made it so that doctors can be certified across the state. 60 doctors so far have been through the education process to qualify to recommend medical cannabis to patients in Alabama. We're hoping that this gives the people of Alabama who are sick, suffering, and dying the access to medicine that they need. Roll Tide. In Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer-Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's quite a bit of debt that comes due this year in the industry, and you will start to hear about and see mergers of companies and complete acquisitions of rival brands. Case in point this week is the edibles company Wild acquiring another edibles brand called Groon. No terms were released, but this could just be the beginning of the M&A year in cannabis. Next up, Virginia, where one of the biggest MSOs in the industry, Curaleaf, is backing out of a deal to acquire a major chain of dispensaries in that state. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The stability of Virginia's medical system is once again in jeopardy. In the last report I did from 2025, I announced that Curaleaf had bought all the interest from the cannabis company, including that coveted production facility and a vertically integrated license. That would have been quite an advantage, as they would have been able to bypass the lengthy application process and had 5 already to operate dispensaries, with a 6th already approved. The deal was thought to be set and ready to seamlessly resume medical access in Health Service Area 4 for $110 million. Now, this is where it takes an interesting spin. A little more than 2 weeks after, a Boston, Massachusetts-based hedge fund affiliate named Mill Street Credit Fund came from behind Curaleaf and made an offer of $130 million plus a $30 million lease liability. The cannabis company broke their deal off with Curaleaf and took the higher offer. The cannabis company will still have to pay a $3.3 million breakup fee to Curaleaf due to breaking the original deal. These new developments lead to many new questions. In my research of Mill Street Credit Fund, I found no record of any other cannabis ventures. So, will this be a flip to another MSO? How long will normal operations continue with the remaining cannabis dispensaries? And most importantly, will Virginia's Medical Access and Health Service Area 4 continue to exist, or will it resemble HSA 1 with no access to patients? I reached out to both the cannabis company and Mill Street Credit Fund, and I will update the story as it unfolds. So stay tuned for further updates to this story, as this will be one of the ones to watch in 2026. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As always, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
The state of Kentucky is a newcomer to the medical cannabis industry, and with only one licensed dispensary open, it's no surprise that it already has run out of flower and product. The Post in Beaver Dam opened its doors on December 13th and then closed 7 days later when it sold out. Laws and regulations in Kentucky limit sales to cannabis grown in the state since, as you know, there is no interstate commerce. On opening day, a crowd of 400 people camped out and waited in line to be part of history. The Post dispensary had over 1,000 sales of eighths, which was the limit for each customer. Right now, there are 24,000 medical card holders in the state of Kentucky. The good news is that more products should be ready for sale by the end of this week. One state that knows all about in-state product and sales is Ohio, which is now dealing with another change to the adult use laws that passed the ballot box. Still, that state joined the $1 billion sold club in 2025, and Christina Brisson has more from her state.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So we don't have a whole lot of updates this week, but we do have a few. We have our sales have topped $836 million when it comes to recreational and over $1 billion when you do recreational and medical use. So now on to SB 56. As we all know, when Mike DeWine signed that, it had a lot of recriminalization in it that we are not happy with. So Ohioans for Cannabis Choice is going to be out there. They filed their referendum that was a week after DeWine signed the bill. They got the initial signatures in. Now the Attorney General in the state have to verify those signatures and the truthfulness and validity of everything. Then they're going to be out there and they're going to need to collect almost 250,000 signatures. And they're going to be canvassing for those. So if you see them out there, get your name on it. The one positive thing about the bill so far is that Piqua actually received their tax money, almost $500,000 that it had in their budget to go to their park system and numerous other things for the city that is providing for its residents. So at least we see that part, it has some movement and the cities are finally getting the money they were due. So that is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. But when we come back, we will introduce you to our newest member of the team. His name is Cole Preston, and his website is thecolememo.com. He is a pro-cannabis advocate in his home state of Illinois. And next, you'll meet Cole Preston as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
2025. The Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which decriminalized the use.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weejits filtration system. What? The Weejits.com, Weejits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems.
Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weegits filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block, or final section of this week's roundup of cannabis news here in the United States. Many advocates are familiar with the Cole memo that was published under President Obama in 2013. At that time, the memo was written by Deputy Attorney General James M. Cole. It protected legal adult use states from federal interference. Then, during President Trump's first term, his Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded that memo in January of 2018. Merrick Garland, who succeeded Sessions as the Attorney General under President Biden in 2021, mostly reinstated it through his own comments when he was in Senate Judiciary hearings before he took over his responsibilities. So now you know the history. Meet Cole Preston, our new Illinois correspondent, who is an advocate and the host of a podcast and website called The Cole Memo. We welcome him to the team, and this is his first Illinois Cannabis Report.
I'm Cole Preston with the Cole Memo with this week's Illinois Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week's story is focused on the release of the annual Cannabis Report for the year of 2025. The Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which decriminalized the use, sale, and possession of small amounts of cannabis from a small number of licensees, requires the release of an annual cannabis report from the various state agencies that oversee the regulation of cannabis within the state of Illinois. During 2025, Illinois issued 93 dispensary licenses, more than any year so far. The Criminal Justice section of the 2025 Adult Use Cannabis Health Advisory Committee includes data on cannabis enforcement and incarceration outcomes. According to the report, 57.5% of those incarcerated for cannabis were Black or African American, and that compares with just 28.7% who were white, which is insane when you remind yourself that both races use the product at exactly the same rate. The data shows that cannabis enforcement in Illinois remains geographically and racially concentrated, particularly in Chicago communities that lack dispensaries. It just so happens that these are the same communities that have always been impacted by the war on drugs. Not much has changed since legalization, and this is a trend that has been reported on by the Chicago Tribune in the past. Unfortunately, in 2024, cannabis arrests in the state of Illinois increased to 4,058, which was the first year-over-year increase since the state decriminalized in 2016 and legalized in 2020. Now, I just wisped the surface in this report. I encourage you to read the full reports now at cannabis.illinois.gov or at my website, thecolememo.com. That'll do it for this week's Illinois Cannabis Report. I'm Cole Preston from the Cole Memo, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
2026 will continue to be the year of merger and acquisition for the cannabis industry. Debt financing is helping the bigger operations stay afloat while they all try to escape from the amount of debt accrued. Earlier, we reported on the acquisition of Gruen by Wild, and now Doug Miller reports on Vireo's acquisition of the delivery service Ease. So what impact did that have on Vireo's stock? Well, that's why we have Doug Miller, who is always high on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. MSO Vieiro Growth has agreed to acquire cannabis retailer and delivery platform Ease, once dubbed the Uber of weed, in a $47 million all-stock deal. The price tag raised eyebrows because Ease was once valued near $700 million. The deal adds 65 retail locations, a delivery network with over 12 million completed orders, and immediate scale over 10 U.S. states. Ease will operate as a wholly owned subsidiary, expanding Viero's footprint in Colorado, Florida, and California. Industry watchers say the timing matters. The transaction follows President Trump's executive order reclassifying cannabis, which many see as a catalyst for consolidation across the sector. Recent deals from other cannabis companies, including Canopy Growth, suggest mergers and acquisitions are entering a new phase with leaner valuations, stronger operators, and survival of the most efficient. So let's see how the stock chart looks for Vero Growth. It is an OTC stock, so it trades under the stock ticker VREOF, and it is trading around 61 cents. It's setting up the run, but be sure to trade it smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
It was March of last year when Sarah Carter was nominated to be the first woman to be nominated for the White House Drug Czar. This past week, she was confirmed by the Senate, and that approval wasn't easy because of the bipartisan divide in our government. However, Carter was affirmed by a 52-48 vote, and her official title will be the Director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. She will work across federal agencies to coordinate drug policy, including law enforcement, public health, prevention, and treatment programs, as well as working with states and international partners. She is a former Fox News journalist with an expertise in international drug cartels. Many outlets, including the Marijuana Herald, report that she is pro-medical cannabis. She is also the mother of 6 children. Now let's check in with Christopher Bright, our Maryland correspondent.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. In Howard County, Maryland, firefighters will soon be able to use medical cannabis off-duty without facing disciplinary action. County officials and the firefighters union IAFF Local 2000 Division reached an agreement in December on a revised cannabis abuse policy, the first major update since 1991. The new rules take effect January 31st. Firefighters must report their medical cannabis patient status to Human Resources and are prohibited from using it within 12 hours of reporting for duty. Normal, which worked with the union for nearly 2 years on this change, highlighted that over 86,000 Marylanders are registered for medical cannabis, including many first responders who use it to manage chronic pain, PTSD, and other serious conditions. Normal Deputy Director Paul Armentino said, just as patients taking traditional medications do not face discrimination in the workplace unless their on-the-job performance is impaired, those who use medical cannabis during their off hours should not face sanctions solely because of their status as medical marijuana patients. While state law still lacks broad workplace protections for off-duty medical cannabis use, Howard County joins other local jurisdictions leading the way on the issue. That's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Florida may have the largest population of medicinal cannabis patients, with over 920,000 people registered, but no one in state government wants to see adult use pass at the ballot box. It seems that the smell disgusts the governor, Ron DeSantis, and now the state attorney general is asking the state Supreme Court to deem the ballot question unconstitutional. In the meantime, the Smart and Safe Florida initiative continues. In the last election, this ballot question passed by a majority of voters, but came up 4 percentage points short of the 60% threshold that will add adult use to the state constitution. The use of the ballot question has long been a citizens' initiative to make change, but now it gets rejected by state politicians, not just in Florida, but in Nebraska too. So now industry advocates who worked for decades to get reforms passed, citizens in Massachusetts, Arizona, and Maine, are fighting prohibitionists to maintain an adult use market that has generated jobs and taxes collected that fuel valuable programs. The fight is never over for this plant medicine, and governments on every level continue to do whatever they can to make it as difficult as possible for the industry to survive. Right now, it's the alcohol industry that is sitting on the sidelines until they are ready to dive into cannabis, an industry that is already heavily impacted by the increase in cannabis use. That's another topic that executive producer Jimmy Young talked to Jamie Pearson about.
It's one of the things that frustrates me. And I think just because I've been in the industry so long, on both sides, on the hemp side and on the cannabis side, is they're talking about the drugstore gummies. Oh, the drugstore gummies. And all these kids are ending up in the emergency room. And I am like, and?
Right.
They ended up in the emergency room. They end up in the emergency room from tobacco, from alcohol, from household chemicals under the sink, from gun violence, from, all these other, evils of the world. And then I look at, and then what happened when they went to the emergency room and they ate some 500 milligram or 1,000 milligram gummy. Maybe they threw up. Maybe they felt paranoid, but did they die? No. What actually happened? And that's the part that frustrates me. I'm not anti, common sense regulation that keeps harmful substances that are brain altering chemicals out of the hands of children. Of course, I'm in favor of that. But what I'm definitely not for is the fear mongering of, but the children, because the reality is, if that were true, we would have sensible gun legislation. Right. Don't give me that BS. You don't care about the children. This is all everybody hedging because we have a government controlled by lobbyists, and we've got the big pharma, big tobacco, and big alcohol companies trying to hedge. And I just read an article today that the alcohol industry lost 800 billion with a B sales, which I immediately thought that can't be right. And I went down the rabbit hole to see if this is just more propaganda, which is kind of what we need citizens to do, is they see some stuff on Instagram, TikTok, whatever they're looking at, and then they have to go actually fact check it, because everybody puts everything out there. It looks credible. Right. It's credible. The alcohol industry lost $800 billion last year. Gen Z is not drinking as much. My generation is not drinking as much. We're starting to recognize that alcohol is poison.
Right.
Make no mistake. It's because so many people across the country are using cannabis and going, oh, I can alter my brain, I can relax, I can sleep better, I can have whatever all the benefits of cannabis are without the hangover, without the addiction, without the, all of the things. Now, I don't want to say alcohol can't be addictive. Exercise can be addictive to an addictive personality. Right. So again, I just think what we have to do is take a tempered look at all of it and relax and be aware that we need to be part of the process.
Right.
I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation in Cannabis Ex America, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Governor Tim Walz has signed a new tribal state cannabis compact with the Bois Fort Band of Chippewa, marking the 7th such agreement in Minnesota. The compact aims to safeguard public health, support adult use cannabis markets, and uphold tribal sovereignty and economic self-sufficiency. Each agreement ensures consistent product testing, data gathering, and safety standards while creating opportunities for jobs, community growth, and strategic alliances. Minnesota has now signed compacts or cooperative agreements with 7 tribal nations: Bois Fort, Fond du Lac, Leech Lake, Mille Lacs, Prairie Island, Red Lake, and White Earth, with more expected soon. Nebraska lawmakers are considering new legislation affecting the state's medical cannabis system, including LB 934, which would make medical cannabis commission members elected by voters instead of appointed by the governor. The move comes as advocates push back against restrictive rules that ban smoking and vaping, limiting cannabis to pills and creams. Meanwhile, the Omaha tribe has moved forward with its own medical cannabis plans, prompting a warning from the state attorney general not to obtain cannabis from the tribe, highlighting tensions between tribal sovereignty and state law. Honoring the voices of tribal nations, I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis X America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally, one more note from Illinois. Did you know that Wednesday, the 14th of this week, is National Pastrami Day? Well, in Chicago, the Ivy Hall dispensary is teaming up with Steingold's, one of the city's great delis, for a high on rye sandwich. Ivy Hall dispensary sells an infused mustard, and they will be offering special high on rye sandwiches on that National Pastrami Day, which is Thursday. There is only 5 milligrams of THC in each mustard dollop, but that might be just what you need for a pick-me-up of sorts on your lunch break if you happen to be in Chicago on Thursday. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Educate yourself and consume responsibly. We'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for y'all all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Elena Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.